Okay, yeah, I guess we can start with the topic. So, Sean, whenever you feel like.
Okay, so I think this is fairly simple one. Right now, OS Swift, or not OS Swift, OS Brick still uses rootwrap in a couple of cases, but both Nova and um, Cinder have rootwrap configuration files that we're shipping for OS Brick. I think it would make sense to centralize those in OSBook itself, so it's shipping its root wrap configuration, because at least on the Nova side, we only really have two use cases for root wrap. One is OSBook, and the other is launching PrivSep. And I technically don't think we need uh, the root wrap config for launching PrivSep either. So if we could remove this configuration out of Nova, we could actually drop it from the dependency list and stop caring, other than the fact that, yes, technically OSBic still will depend on rootwrap and it'll still get installed. But if that eventually goes to PrivSep only as well, then we'll have no dependency on rootwrap anymore. Um, I was wondering, how do people feel about that? Could we move this to OSBrick? Do you think that would break anything? Yeah.
So I looked at doing this a few years ago um, because it's a sensible idea for sure. Um, and I think it is a good idea. I don't know exactly what's required to do this. I mean, you have to set up um, something, I think, where this file that's basically a config file is shipped in pip with OSBrick, and then you have to get Cinder and Nova to find it and consume it when you install Cinder and Nova. And I don't know kind of what the pip normal way to do that would be. I think in RDO RPM packages, we do this in RPM spec files where the Cinder RPM spec will go fetch the filters from the OSBrick package and copy them into a useful place or something. Um, so what I'm getting at is I think it's a good idea. I don't know if it's as easy as it sounds, but I think if somebody wants to take it on, it's probably a good thing to do.
So one of the concerns I had is we do have some stuff OSBrick in both files, and I'm not sure if they're in sync or does it matter if they're not in sync, etc. I thought we had a bug recently. I don't know if it was upstream or downstream, related to these filters being out of sync. But right now we're not trying to coordinate them in any way, shape, or form. So I'm just unsure about what protections we're getting from having this in the Node repo right now, and should we be copying stuff out of the Cinder repo to limit what it can do, or not today. Whereas if we're centralizing this OSBrick, at least the people who are maintaining OSBrick could determine this is what should be in there if it's still needed. And then eventually, once any of the root map stuff goes away and you can just rely on PrivSep, then you can completely delete it in one place and it's kind of done everywhere. You're right that there's going to be some packaging element to this, and
Well,
I don't really know what that will look like, but yeah.
well, I think the current state of things is that when Nova is installed, some packaging or container operation outside of Cinder and Nova is doing something to put this config in place. Um, so there may be some things getting installed that are not obvious when looking at the upstream context. I don't know that moving to PrivSep is really going to happen for some of this OSBrick stuff because some of them are, well, I mean, we have to run external shell commands for some drivers. So we need to shell out somehow. I guess we end up shelling out to a root command line call via PrivSep instead of via rootwrap. Is that the proposal?
I mean, that's what had already been started to do. Now, in principle, how PrivSep is meant to help is that you're meant to have multiple PrivSep contexts that have different capabilities. And then you have very targeted functions that have a limited set of inputs to them that you basically know are safe. And they run in the context that has a minimum set of elevated permissions that they actually require to function. That doesn't mean you have like 50 contexts, but you might have like 3. Right now in Nova, we have 1, and that gives you almost full root because it's got cap sysadmin, it's got cap netadmin, it has the ones to override file system permissions. So we
That's
have
very
work there too. Yeah.
Yeah, and that being able to do fine-grained permissions control with PrivSep is really useful when you're setting it up to run Python code. But when you're just shelling out to run commands, I think you basically have to do it as root anyway. So we have some code in Cinder that does that, but it's I think when the goal of the PrivSep call is to just run a command as root, I don't think you can really gain a lot from trying to do the fine-grained permission stuff with it. And
Yeah,
the
so
point
it might make sense to keep
in that,
it in your case, right?
yeah, so it's good to move it to PrivSep, but in that situation, there's not really a lot of difference between rootwrap and PrivSep, I think. And I forget
Well,
how we
actually,
do this now exactly.
rootwrap is actually technically more performant, or not more performant, and more secure in that particular case, because when using PrivSep, you're not filtering the commands that run, but when you are using rootwrap, it is actually trying to match the command you're running against a known set of regexes, which the operator can also then tighten. Whereas on the PrivSep side, we're just saying you get cap sysadmin. So if you cap sysadmin and you don't have cap netadmin, you can be sure that the volume operation is not going to, turn off your networking. But it's not the same as saying you shall run this one mount command with, this wildcat of options they're allowed to pass to mount. But that requires someone to maintain a list of operations in the filter, which is what those files I was linking to are. They're the filters that we have, and we don't ever look at those on the Nova side for OSBrick. So they were set up once, and we assume that that's still fine.
It's only still fine because people that deploy it are handling it for you, is my assumption. Because otherwise, certain storage protocols that call out to commands aren't going to work if the filters aren't there.
Yeah.
So
the only thing we have in the filter right now is, I guess we have the PrivSep helper, and that's about it.
Yeah, so I think it does make sense to try to unify these in OSBrick. Somebody wants to try that and see how it goes. I think that would be pretty sensible. I'm sure there's a good way to do it. I spent a very short amount of time trying to do it a couple years ago and did not get that far before I went to go do something else. But I do think it makes sense.
So I guess one of the things we could do is I can propose a patch to Nova to delete the rootwrap dependency out of Nova and the file, and we can see if that breaks anything. Because just looking at GitHub right
But
now, I don't see any direct import of rootwrap anywhere in the Nova codebase. So if our dependencies that are actually using rootwrap have defined it as a dependency, it'll still get installed properly, but that would at least allow us to remove it out of the code base and not suggest that we're maintaining those configurations anymore.
are you assuming that all the rootwrap views that we have are not done by the Nova services? And if so, we can just try to delete it and see how it goes.
So as far as understood, we were meant to be at that point already for that any elevated queries in Nova should be using PrivSep. But yeah, I was basically suggesting if we remove it, we might be able to assert that that is still true. I don't think we've added anything directly. My main
There's this,
concern would be, are we using other process anywhere? Process utils that run.
I mean, there's a few kind of layers here that we have to pick apart. If your concern is remove usage of rootwrap and only use PrivSep, I think in a lot of the OS brick context, we've already done that, but we've done it by using PrivSep to just run commands as root. So it is PrivSep, but it just does the same thing that rootwrap used to do, I believe, is how some of that is implemented.
Yeah, we just use rootwrap to start precept. Yep. I think like nobody's doing. That's what OSBrick does. That's what Cinder does. I think we are all at that point.
And there was an idea at one point that I was looking into. I don't really remember the context of why, but I think I was at one point trying to figure out if I could remove that usage of rootwrap to start PrivSep and instead launch PrivSep from like systemd service files so that you don't have to have wrap code to do it.
Yes. That's technically supported by PrivSep. You can specify the socket as part of the inputs to your config file, and it can do it starts as root, and then it can drop privileges immediately down to the set that's configured to have. I haven't seen anyone implement that in an installer. So like it's not supported in DevStack to run in that mode. I haven't seen anyone do it in production, but it is something that the PrivSep library actually supports doing.
Yeah, I mean, it probably would be a good way to do it for a lot of our distributions, really. Something nobody's really looked at yet.
Probably because then you need a different container, right?
Well, you got to have systemd files, and then if you have containers, you got to have container files that do it, and it multiplies into all of your different deployment mechanisms.
Yep.
Point out that is always the afterthought every time we look at this area is that glance also is a concern with this OS brick PrivSep rootwrap stuff, because when you use Cinder as a backend for glance, it does all the brick things like Nova does. So if we change anything, we need to go test that side too and make sure it will work in the glance world.
Yeah, so one thing I'm just looking at the Nova code base is we've isolated this behind our utils like get root helper function, and what we seem to be doing is calling that and passing it whenever we're setting up the connector. And that function inside it, there is a workaround config option to disable rootwrap. And then it just becomes sudo instead of sudo nova rootwrap, whatever, right? So if we were to, I think that's the only real usage we have of rootwrap right now. And other than that, it's just starting the PrivSep daemon. That's the other uses inside Nova.
I think
So
that's the same thing.
Yeah. I don't know if it's just me, but Eric, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, I was saying, I think that Cinder does the same thing as of a while ago.
Okay, so do people think it would make sense for us to try and start disabling some of this in one of the jobs and see what happens? Or how do you think we could? Because I think if I disable rootwrap there, it's just going to fall back to sudo, but then we're going to see that there's going to be no confinement at all. I don't know if that's okay.
So I guess the more we talk about this, the less clear I am on the current state of things. So if Nova is only calling rootwrap to launch privsep, where do these filters actually get used from Brick? Or are they
So
just not
when we're
used?
creating the connector, we pass in the string that's used as the root helper, which will have Nova rootwrap and then the path to our rootwrap config filter file. And we only have two things in that, which is privsep helper for OSBrick and privsep helper for Nova itself.
Okay, so I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, are these filters in the context of Brick being called from Nova actually filtering anything at this point or not?
Yeah, I don't know. They seem to just, if it's doing what I think it's doing, it's just filtering you to being able to call privsep helper, and then everything else has been done from that privsep daemon, because we have no other filters at all in our config. Whereas if I look at Cinder's one, there are quite a number of filters listed there. So I don't know if having no other filters means that we can run anything and it'll just work, or if it means that we can't run any other commands, because I haven't looked at rootwrap properly in a very long time. I thought it meant that you couldn't run anything other than privsep helper, which is, I think, okay for us to drop this then, because in theory, when you create your user and you give it sudo permissions for Nova or whatever, you can limit I think you can limit the commands there. Though I might be wrong about that.
So I'm not 100% sure, but the ask for the Nova team is they want to remove the rootwrap filters that they're only supporting because of OS Brick. But I mean, there has been discussion all around, like move OS Brick rootwrap to privsep. So I'm not clear on if there are any action items on this, or like what is the ask here from the Nova team, like exactly what should we be doing?
I guess to remove this, I think we would have to stop passing a root helper to the connector when we're creating it. And then if OSBrick wanted to use rootwrap or whatever in the connector to become root, it would do it via its own config file, right? And yes, I know that OSBrick sections can be read from the Nova.conf, but it would no longer be something that we'd be configuring and shipping as part of Nova. The filters, if there were to be any rootwrap filters, will be part of OSBrick.
It looks like the only filter there right now is the privsep one, right?
Basically, what I'm trying to get at is, can we remove rootwrap from our requirement.txt and delete that folder? And if we did, would it break anything?
Well, I think it's going to. Well, OS brick connectors have to have some way to become root, and so if you can pass in different helper to the connectors, then it might work. So presumably Nova has some cases right now where it needs to run command as root via its privsep call, right?
Well, not as full root. We have a limited set of capabilities. Well, no, I was going to say we have a limited set of capabilities. We have sysadmin, netadmin, and a couple of other things. So it's almost full root. We have started to use Python bindings as much as possible when we can. So when we've limited how much stuff we interact with directly with privileges as much as possible on Nova. OSVIF, for example, it needs cap netadmin because it was interacting with some network interfaces when it was adding and removing ports from Linux Bridge, etc. But for as much as possible, we have tried to not have elevated privileges. Things like libvirt have elevated privileges to start the instances, but Nova itself has tried to de-escalate as much as we can. That's an example. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so since the Nova rootwrap filters now, has one filter for an OS brick privsep, and there's another one for a Nova sysadmin privsep. Is the proposal to get rid of the brick one and just reuse the Nova one and pass it to brick?
No,
or do we want to go down the route of trying to figure out if we can run brick code with fewer permissions?
So in OSVIF itself has its own privsep daemon, and it doesn't use rootwrap, but it has its own root elevation mechanism, which is also called sudo, and that's how it spawns privsep, and everything that needs privileges is then done by the privsep daemon. We don't pass in any context or any way to elevate into OSVIF. It's all handled by the library. So I'm saying that OSBrick should take ownership of this, and if it needs to have a way to elevate, then it should be implemented in OSBrick, and it should all be internal. Like OSVIF, you can add configuration elements to Nova's config that are coming from OSBrick that can specify what the command is or whatever. But that's what I was hoping we would do, so that basically the Nova team doesn't have to try and look at these and figure out if it's doing anything or can we keep it or not, and we don't have to list it necessarily as a dependency.
Right, I think that makes I think that the previous notion when we were reworking some of this a few years ago was that we wanted to move, or someone, whoever was doing this at the time, was trying to move brick to use root helpers provided by privsep. In the proposal that you're making right now, I think the outcome of that is basically that OS brick would basically just manage rootwrap in itself. So if that's the case, I think you actually go back to the model we used to have where OSBrick has to ship rootwrap filters. And the issue there is that whenever you call into Brick from Nova or Cinder, you have to tell it how to find those filters, because since OSBrick is just a library, it doesn't really have a mechanism to have its own configuration file or anything.
So the way OSVIF handles that is when we initialize OSVIF, it adds dynamic configuration options to Nova's config that it will read. So in the nova.conf, we can put in configuration options for OSVIF in a OSVIF underscore section in our config. And those config options are defined entirely in OSVIF. There's nothing on the Nova side other than the fact that we call initialize at the start, which loops over all of the plugins, loads the configuration sections from those, and adds them into our config. The same way we register the stuff internally in Nova.
That might be a reasonable model to follow. I haven't looked at how OSVIF does any of this. It might be that the thing to do here is to go look at how it's done there and see if we could apply it to Nova. So Steven's put some comments here about converting Brick calls over to rootwrap. In the Blue Jeans chat.
Can you guys hear me? Sweet. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
So I've forgotten a lot of the context on this because as you can see, it was about a year ago I was working on this. But if I recall correctly, I was planning on doing, I think, pretty much the same thing in OSBrick that we'd done in OSPrivSep. The mistake that I made was I tried to lump this in with dropping support for out-of-tree encryptors, and Lee Yardwood pointed out that we had some migration work to do for this, and I dropped the ball then on this. It might be worth having a look at those two patches and seeing if they're the right approach to follow. I'm pretty sure I have the complete set locally somewhere, but as a model to actually go and resolve this issue rather than, starting from scratch.
Change basically takes calls that are currently calls via rootwrap and it puts them into a privsep section, which then just calls process utils execute, I guess.
Yeah, effectively how we did it for Nova. So there's no kind of passing of, like from a privsep, is there the concept of filters, Sean, that actually we want to be copying across from Nova? Is there any kind of state we'd want to be copying, or can OSBrick manage this thing entirely by just declaring the capabilities it needs?
OSBrick can do it entirely internally because right now we're not copying anything useful. Like that, we're not setting up anything useful in Nova's rootwrap.
Right. So if that's the case, then this seems like possibly the correct way to go. I'd love to ask someone that knows a lot about privsep to review this, but I don't know if any of those people exist in OpenStack anymore. So
I can give it a try because a long time ago in a far, far away galaxy, I did that. So, I mean, if I have enough time for reading the context.
Cool. So yeah, like I said, the only thing that was blocking this work from me actually completing it was the stuff that I munged in lower in the series to do with removing support for out-of-tree encryptors. could just try and extricate that out. I'm assuming I did that for a reason, because I didn't want to have to convert something, but I'm not entirely sure.
At least that's a starting point, I think.
Yeah, the only feedback quickly looking at that I give is you're following the Nova anti-pattern of having
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's a bad thing to do. We should be like using more local methods, but for the sake of expediency
but
and getting
it
off
does
of
work.
rootwrap.
Yeah, that's. I mean, we decided a long time ago that we are following that bad decision, but I mean, if it's a matter of removing rootwrap, and I know the pattern is bad, but unless someone offers to modify that.
Yeah, for anyone that isn't aware, the pattern that Sean's referring to is the idea of using a central privsep module that contains kind of highly generic privsep methods or privsepified generic methods, as opposed to very specific controlled methods,
Privset
local
context,
methods.
Yeah, different context based on the things that you are wanting. Yeah, I know having a global privsep sucks. Like all the all the other stuff that we say, but yeah, I mean.
Well, I think we're going to find in the brick case that a large percentage of these calls have to shell out and have cap sysadmin anyway. So I don't know that it really matters too much for this scenario.
I guess as much as well, yeah.
I guess there is one other thing that's kind of related to this that downstream security teams had asked us about, which is right now in Nova we have cap DAC, which is the thing that allows us to read and write any file as any user. They would really like us to not need to put that into containers anymore. I know on the Nova side, the only place we use that is, I think, when we're dealing with the LVM backend. If you're just using cap sysadmin, that's probably okay in OSBrick, but it would be nice if we were doing this work to make sure that we don't have any capabilities that are like ultra powerful that we don't actually need in the context.
Yeah, I
do
think
you know what you put in?
I think it gets tricky because a lot of this code is only relevant for certain drivers that we don't have a very direct way to test. So figuring out which kit are really needed might be some real work to do.
So at least on the OSVIF side, we have a privsep context per plugin. And we originally thought we needed different capabilities in each plugin. It turns out we just needed cap, netadmin, and all three that we have in 3, but that was how we were doing that. So if you had out of tree plugins for OSBrick, for example, then the idea would be they would provide their own privsep context, that they would define the minimum set that they needed. But I don't know if that's a pattern you want to mirror. It does mean that if you have multiple plugins on the single host, you end up with multiple daemons. But if each host is only going to have, say, one one storage backend, then it's not that much overhead.
Yeah, I've noticed I actually, in that patch, I forgot to include the privsep context thing to actually define the capabilities. So yeah, that would not work. So let's add it.
It's probably in one of the earlier ones, no? Or maybe one of the follow-up ones. But yeah, it's not in that specific one. You are referring to the OSBrick privsep default entry point, though, in the code. I assume you have actually, that's already defined probably in OSBrick.
Yeah, it's in some commit somewhere.
Well, no, it's that OSBrick already has a PrivSep context defined in it, so you're probably just reusing the existing one that's there for these additional calls.
Yeah, does it show? I haven't looked at this in a while.
Yeah, so again,
The PrivSep context that's there has cap sysadmin, and if it's a virtual environment, it also has cap DAC read search. So it looks like cap sysadmin is the minimum that you need right now, although that likely can be broken down further if you really wanted to. Stephen, is this something you would have time to pick back up and repropose, or is this something we should try and find someone else to do?
I'd be happy to look at this side of things. Like I said, though, there was a to-do on this change, which I'm going to put in the Blue Jeans chat from Lee Yarwood. I think it was that one. That one, or the one before. Yeah, this one. And this was the comment that he left, that we need a release note and we need a migration in Cinder to basically migrate these unsupported volume types across, or these legacy volume types across to like the new shiny thing. And I never got around to doing that. So it would be nice if somebody was able to do that and create kind of a depends on thing. I suspect, though, that we would need to wait a release between when this gets added to Cinder and when we remove the things that I'm trying to remove from OSBrick, to allow it to kind of bake in, or cap an upper cap on our version of OSBrick until the Cinder migration has been around for long enough. That, or we separate those two different things if that's possible. But again, I'm pretty sure I had a reason for doing things this way. Otherwise, I wouldn't have stuck the two of them in the same series. I would have done it separately. I'll have a look next week.
I suspect that the reason they're tied together was because we wanted to remove the non-Lux crypt setup stuff.
Yeah, that's probably it. And I didn't want to have to convert the thing. So maybe in the short term, we should convert it and remove the non-Lux thing at a later date, once Cinder has a database migration to convert any remaining columns with that information in it, or that volume type stored in it.
Just on that, when you say non-Lux, are you referring to using like different algorithms, or are you referring to the host mounting stuff where we use dmcrypt to decrypt the volume versus using QEmu's native Lux support?
No, this was at one point, well, I guess forever, when you did encrypted volumes, you could do Lux volumes, or you could do encrypted volumes that were non-Lux but were still encrypted. So you don't have the whole Lux management layer in there that handles some things. I hope that nobody's really used that for many years, because we all standardized around the Lux format for them. And I know that we've never advised any of our customers to use non-Lux crypt setup mode. So I'd kind of be surprised if it's really out there, but it has been supported for a long time. And I forget what the exact mechanism is, but it's, you use crypt setup and de-encrypt, but you don't have the Lux layer in there. You just have an encrypted flat volume.
Okay, I think we could end up talking about the minutia of this for a long time. Are we happy to say that we should try and revive Steven's old patch and see if we can make some progress on them this cycle, or do we not have energy to dive into this again?
I think that makes sense, and I think we need some kind of to-do or bug on the Cinder side to track the notion that somebody should go look at this encrypted volume type migration issue. I can probably take a look at that. I don't know really how big of a project that is, having never worked in that
as
area.
far as it might be I think it would be a good thing to do. It should be a very small migration, and it would provide us an opportunity to stress test all of that new Olympic stuff that we have in Tree. So we did the same thing in Nova last cycle. We added a migration just to stress test that stuff and found a couple of bugs. All that you should need to do is there's some column somewhere that's got 6 values in it, and we need to map 4 of those 6 values to different things, to the other 2. Should be a piece of cake, in theory.
All right.
Well, is a data migration here, as in like, if it's
data
being encrypted in whatever non-Lux format, do we need to actually take the data on the volume and translate it?
It's just changing the identifiers that are in the encrypted types to point to the preferred term in Brick now, which is to just call it Lux instead of nova.whatever.encryptor.lux. So I'll take the action on the Cinder side to go look at that and see what it'll take to move that part along.
Right, give me a shout if you need anything from me.
Okay, were there any other topics from the Cinder side for Nova? Or was that the agenda for the class project session? I think that was the only one that Nova had for Cinder.
I just wanted to briefly discuss about the rebuild reimage feature for the volume backed instances. So I've been working on it, and I guess there is, I hope there still will be agreement. So last cycle I was able to manage to merge all that code on the Cinder side, but there are still pending patches on Nova side. So I'm still working on it. Just want to know if we are still agreeing on doing that.
Have you already proposed the spec or not? I can't remember. Because the spec was approved. Spec was approved on Yoga. Implementation arrived late, like close to milestone 3, and then got pumped. But now we are on the Z time span. And just to make it clear, to answer your question, I don't expect any controversy in your spec because spec was already approved. I guess during the implementation you haven't found any new fancy juicy stuff to modify.
We did discuss one thing during the implementation, right, related to the events and the actual workflow. I don't know if the spec was updated to reflect what you agreed with Lee, etc. at the start of the year, but when you were proposing it, if you want to incorporate that into the spec specifically, then that would be good.
Yeah.
So I didn't get which things you wanted me to update on the spec.
If I remember correctly, back in January when you were talking to Lee about this, there was some details about the exact workflow and the calls that we had to do between Nova and Neutron to get that to work. And I think you came up with a slightly simplified version versus what was in the original spec. So when you're reproposing the spec, can you just make sure that it's accurate to what you had already agreed with Lee, etc., and had updated the implementation to do?
Okay, I'm not able to remember on top of my head the discussion with Lee, but I think I addressed most of the concerns before the spec was approved. But yeah, I will take a look.
Because I think we're all agreed that we want this to continue forward, and if you propose the patches in the spec, we will review it on the Nova side. I don't think there's any outstanding large issues that would block it from progressing.
Yeah, and I also started to review the series, and I mean it was like the last 2 days before feature freeze that I just took a look on that one. But yeah, I just feel it's in the review backlog. Just make sure that your spec got approved very quickly, and then we'll add it into the backlog of things that we have to review.
Sure, I will repropose that right away, like the spec, and the patches are ready. Like we have 3 patches, one for the compute manager, one for the conductor layer, and one for adding the new micro version and the API layer. I also have a Tempest test set up, and Dan Smith has been actively reviewing all the patches. So yeah, I will try to repropose the spec as quickly as I can.
Yeah, I do know that Dan Smith had some concerns with the Tempest test because he had some issues with how it was doing the verification and that, but I think we can just proceed with the upstream review to get this landed rather than I don't think he'd any concerns that aren't already called out in his feedback. Right.
Yeah, I will take a look at that. I got busy with the PTG, so I didn't get much time. But yeah, I have seen Dan Smith comments on the Tempest patch, and I will get them addressed. Okay, I guess if everyone agrees, then I will repropose the spec in Nova and continue working on it again.
Okay, cool. Can we actually wrap the conversation because we still have a few topics to discuss on the Nova side, and it's Friday late for some European folks, so I don't want to hold them too much. So cool. Definitely appreciated the conversation about the previous stop and the volume bucket one. So thanks, Nova folks. I owe you some beers when we meet, maybe on the next PTG. But if you can still be around on the Nova room at the top of the hour, that would be awesome. And then we'll try to make it quick. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks everyone from the Nova team for joining, and
Yep.
it was a great conversation.
Thanks to the Nova team.
Thanks.
Okay, I'll just quickly go through the Etherpad, and we have one topic left. So I already discussed. I'm not sure if Benz is here. I see him in.
I am.
Yes, he's here.
Hello, everyone. This is Benson from Ericsson.
Yeah, hi, Benz. So
Hi.
if you would still like,
Yeah.
you can discuss your topic. I had a conversation with him before, and yeah, but we can discuss now. So.
Yeah. First of all, I wanted to say hello and already thank you for the help in IRC. Basically, my colleagues would like to deploy Glance backed by Cinder, and they did some testing at high concurrency, and they identified we believe they identified a few bugs, and I was trying to list those things they identified here, and I am already familiar with OpenStack processes. Previously worked quite a lot around Newsroom, but not in Glance or Cinder. So excuse me if that part of my knowledge is a little bit missing. But so basically, I would like to ask for some direction, not necessarily now, but when you had the time to look at those logs, in which way to fix these bugs. And I will be around here to fix those bugs or do some testing. I just would like to ask for directions, which way it is best to do. The first bug I believe we found is
Ben, sorry
yeah.
to interrupt you. Just a second, because for everybody this is different. What is considered high concurrency? It is 5, 10, 100.
So I was able to reproduce the first bug with 2 parallel image saves. And
okay.
And my understanding is that Rajat, if I'm pronouncing your name right, believes that this bug I found that may share the same root cause that my reproduction. So I guess that you guys had a previous fix for that maybe, and maybe this can be a corner case of that may not be covered in that previous fix. Is my understanding correct?
So the last time I worked on this, I think it was in Wallaby or Xena, maybe in Xena. So I tested the multiple image create. So I tested 10 concurrent image and created 10 concurrent volumes with the same image, and it just worked fine. And the operation you are trying is the image save operation, but it again goes through the same attach detach workflow. I haven't tested that operation, to be honest, specifically, but it should work in the same way that operation worked. But I again, to provide any insights on this, I again have to create an environment and retest it.
I fully understand that the PTG's week is not the best week for this kind of debugging.
What's the backend? Sorry to interrupt. The backend that is being used in Cinder? It is ISCSI, NFS.
I was reproducing it in the way DevStack sets up Glance backed by Cinder by default.
It's LVM.
Oh, so LVM. Okay.
Yep.
So I hope I provided information on how to reproduce this. When we talked about collecting logs, I also added some information about how I'm reproducing this, and I attached that to the bug we talked about in IRC. And if maybe I did not provide any some information, just let me know, and I will try to collect what I can. And other than that, I believe there may be a second piece for which I'm looking for. I also linked that from the Etherpad. You guys previously fixed a bug. I'm not sure if there was actually a bug report for it, that Cinder API validation always mandated the use of instance UUIDs. And basically, I think we would like to have that a bit further backported than it is right now. And I wanted to ask if is that possible to further backport it. I already proposed the backport to Victoria. So if you think that's an okay thing to do, I'm asking mostly because it clearly affects API behavior, and I'm not sure how exactly you consider that backportable, but it was already backported by some of you, I believe, to Wallaby. So I hope it is backportable, and I wanted to ask if it is.
If it has already been backported and Victoria it's still in maintenance, it should be eligible, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an okay one to backport. We had had some discussion about this one a few months ago, and I think it seems reasonable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks a lot. That's good news for me.
So that is acceptable to backport, but just one thing I want to mention. So this, I found out the issue when I was trying to implement the new attachments API on the Glance side, which made use of this micro version and didn't pass the instance UID, so it failed on the Cinder side. So that support is only in Xena. So we do have backported this, like this good bug fix to backport, but this won't help you with your Glance use case because the Glance code still exists in Xena only, and it was like not approved of backport since it was considered as a feature. So you can backport this bug fix and it would be helpful, but Glance could not make use of it, as in Victoria, Glance is still using the old attachment API.
Yeah, I mean that part is yeah. So
that could be a problem if I didn't know. Sorry, that you were using an older release, and Rajat, correct me if I'm wrong. That probably the multi-attach works kind of best or only with the new interface, right? New attach interface.
Yes.
Which was not available before. So basically the problem is the concurrency is never going to work because that release doesn't support. They require attach mechanisms for multi-attach. Basically, it doesn't have proper multi-attach support, Cinder, so Glance cannot even use it, right?
Yeah. Here I think I need to separate what I was able to reproduce on a master dev stack and what my downstream colleagues are doing, because I think I was able to reproduce the first bug I was talking about in a master dev stack. The second one I did not reproduce, I just produced the backport because my understanding is that my colleagues are entertaining the idea that in downstream they will take a stable Victoria Glance but put a newer Glance store in it because they want to use a few features that were released later than Victoria. And I understand that that is not the upright upstream supported combination of these things, but I still believe that probably from upstream perspective, if the API spec said that the API validation should work in a certain way, then hopefully that backport is still valid from an upstream perspective.
Correct. One thing, you've mentioned that you have talked about two different bugs, but in the Etherpad, I see reference to already existing ones, and I don't know if the two bugs you talk about, which ones are those? Because did you write it on IRC and not on the Etherpad?
Just a moment. So
because it would be good to have it all here, in the Etherpad.
I think I included everything in there. So we were already in the lucky situation that I believe that all the bugs we found had some previous reports. And just what I have put in second in the line 660, I still believe that has the same root cause as what we found. Though the reproduction is a little bit different because in that bug, it is, I think, doing creates, parallel creates, while I'm doing parallel image saves.
And in your case, because it doesn't say here, what is your operation that is not create?
Image save, two image saves.
Okay. Okay, to leave it here for reference. So the backport, we seem to be in agreement that it's acceptable, the backport, and it can be merged. And the other one, I don't know if Rajat is going to have time to look at it. I'm saying Rajat because he's the most experienced in this area. So
the other one being this 805.072 patch.
Yeah, and the other one is the line 664, for which I never found a bug report, just the fix for the API validator and its backport.
Yeah, I probably forgot to report it, and but yeah, again, it's similar to supporting. So in Glance store side, I had to implement the new attachments API, and as Gurka pointed out, like I had to do it to support the multi-attach use case. And while doing that, I found out this issue. So this is the API side of things, and I have a similar patch in Python Cinder client, for which I remember I have a bug report for. So the Cinder side changes are mostly to support the Glance use case of the new attachments API and all the multi-attach support.
So this,
To answer your question, Eric, is not that one. The one that we're talking about backporting is the one from line 664, which is only the API.
right.
So a different one.
Well, you mentioned that one and another one. Somebody did. So what's the other one?
So I only wanted to mention these two, what's on line 660 and 664.
Right. So this patch on line 660, I think if we could look at it real quick, I have a hard time telling if this is a good idea or not, because it changes some state checking in the API that seems like it might be fairly complex, or it might have pretty complex side effects. Or if we want to review it later, that's fine too.
As you feel fit. I also should add that I just had, before the PTG, planned some vacation right after the PTG. So if I don't answer during the next 2 weeks, it's not because I disappeared, but because I have some vacation pre-planned. But as soon as I'm back from that, I would like to come back, contact you, and ask for some direction how to fix these bugs.
Well, maybe I'll ask this question in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone know if it's actually safe to allow a reserve call on a volume that's already in the reserve state?
I don't. I don't know if
it's not safe.
Right, which is what I'm getting at when I look at this patch. I have a strong suspicion that this is not something that's going to work.
That's the whole point of reserve. You reserve it. If somebody else calls a reserve and somebody has done the reserve, it must fail.
Right. So could you put that on that patch in line 660?
The 660 is the other one, right? No, I'm probably making a mistake. Sorry, I'm confusing.
No, I think 660 is the correct one.
I don't think I'm even in the right etherpad anymore. Sorry. Friday.
Then let me probably add that Eric does not consider this proposed fix safe.
Yeah, probably not. I will check now and comment. Yeah, it's line 660. You're right, Eric. Thanks. But succeed. It cannot be an item. You cannot succeed in an already reserved volume to do a reservation. Change it to reserve. It must fail. That is the requirement of a reserve. Is somebody's right now going through the process of attaching? So
which means we need a different approach to fix this.
Definitely.
So from the Glance perspective,
it's usually a retry. It's usually a retry. You tried, it failed. Let me check what's the status. Reserve it. Okay, let me wait half a second. I don't know, and try again. It's basically a retry mechanism if it's reserved. That could be, and that's on the client side. Because the client has multiple options. Either it orchestrates their attachment one by one, serializing them, or if they can have a conflict of two trying to do it simultaneously, then one of them is going to fail and that one has to retry while the other completes or fails or does whatever, and the state goes back to something that the other one can use.
And
Yeah,
this
and
logic... Sorry, go on.
I was just saying, like the same mechanism is implemented on the glance side. If the volume is in reserve state, then we retry, and there is a retry decorator, like it tries for 5 times, and till that the volume mostly becomes in use, and then we do the second attachment. And for handling all the attachments and the terminate connection call, I have a separate module in glance side. So we use this retry mechanism, and as I said, like it has worked for me, like using the same image volume 10 times, having 10 different attachments to it. But somehow, yeah, I need to check why that doesn't work for this case.
And if I may ask that, does the same logic apply to, so I believe that proposed fix adds to that allowed list not just reserved but in attaching. But then if I understand right, those are two different cases and this logic only applies to the reserved one, right?
But it should be, well, the thing is both cases can be grouped together because it's the same thing. Somebody is right now going through the phase of having request. Well, the request is a service says, I'm going to start doing a process of attaching. And then the same process says, okay, now let's continue, because by doing the reserve, I know that nobody else is going to do anything. It's kind of a lock. I have locked this volume for me. Now I go and start attaching. And then when I say do the attach, now export it, because I know I'm the only one doing it, it changes to attaching. But it's still, I still have the lock that I created by doing the reserve. So until the volume goes to available to attach to in use, nobody else should be able to do anything with it regarding attaching. That's why both cases, it's in a general sense, it's the same. You acquire the lock, so nobody else should be able to do anything. And that's why all the processes usually do the reserve first. So if there is a collision, they know.
Yeah, I should have been more clear in my explanation. So, like, we don't specifically check for the reserve state, but for any state other than in use, available, or downloading, Cinder returns a bad request. And for that particular bad request, we retry on glance. So if it is reserved or attaching, Cinder will return a bad request and we will retry on the glance side. So it's not state dependent. It's just if Cinder allows that operation or not.
Makes sense. And then I'm also understanding that this may not be a bug in Cinder but in glance.
Exactly. That maybe the retry mechanism that Red Hat has in place just need to be added to one additional place or something like that. So probably not a big patch there, because like Red Hat says, the code is already there to do the retry and to handle the multiple connections. Everything is there.
Okay, makes perfect sense. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Right now, I think I'm out of questions.
That's glad we could answer, and it is understandable to not be clear about the reserve attaching and all those states, because the attach flow in general is a complex one. So yep, it's common to say what's going on, why is it doing this. Yep, we've all been there.
Do we have any kind of documentation on how that works and what those states mean? Because that would really help out, everybody who's not named Gorka probably at this point.
I have my own documentation. Yep.
Okay. So then I guess I wanted to say thanks again for all the help. Again, I will get back and would like to work on fixing these bugs. Until then, I hope I provided enough information so that you can see if I'm just doing something wrong or is it really reproducible. I hope it is. Again, I will not be disappearing. I'm just going on 2 weeks of vacation, and as soon as I'm back, I will show up again and probably ask for a little bit of direction in how to fix these things.
Yeah,
And,
thanks for bringing this topic, and it was a very helpful discussions, and we at least got a new work item to. I will look for any existing attachment documents, and if not, we will try adding them. That will be useful for everyone to understand this new attach workflow. And I will work on that. I will take that item to reproduce this and look for possible fixes. And I will get back to you on this. So thanks.
Yeah,
thanks a lot,
you.
everyone.
Okay. I updated this topic with all the possible work items and going through the Etherpad. I think the CI artifacts we can discuss in a Cinder meeting, a video meeting, or would be an item for the virtual, the mid-cycle PTG. And apart from that, I think we have everything covered for today's agenda. So is there anything anyone would like to discuss apart from our agenda?
I think as the action for the CI part is to let Simon know about the information that Luigi provided and ask him for a specific case where a volume, he knows this volume has been left behind, so that and he tells us the job, so we can trace back to, because the name, like Luigi always say, the naming is specific. You can trace back the job that failed, the test that failed based on the name. So we should be doing that to at least look at the test, because for the non-failures, which are clearly a bug, we should be able to easily fix them. And for the others one, the errors, the tools should alleviate the problem. And at least Simon can try it and tell us if it works or not for failures as well. I can do that. I can talk with Simon and see all this.
Sure. Sounds good. I have added an action item. Okay.
I'm happy to provide more insights in case. So if the discussions need to be, if there is another discussion, I'm around.
Okay. Sure, we will plan to discuss it, and till then I think Simon can also look at the action item and collect more information, so the next time we discuss this it will be more productive. Okay, if any other thing anyone would like to discuss? Okay, then I will just stop the recording and